which turn he had made or what to do to regain that. And what he'd started to do was build 4 questions that he could use in the midst of the silence that would quickly identify what kind of listener they were. And then he could shift his natural way of speaking, which was aligned with his natural way of listening, and shift to their listening. So I told you that we have a model called SCAN. So S is get grounded in who you are and how you listen, knowing you'll have to shift. The C is connect to your client or whomever, and not only what their challenges are what's important to them, but also what kind of a listener they are. So you sense where you are, get grounded, you connect with them, you adjust not what you want to share with them, but how you share it so that they can pick it up the way you mean it to be. And then you navigate the conversation because now you've got this ability to know how you need to show up as well as how to share critical information to them in a way they can really understand it at a meaningful level.
There's another really hot topic in the future of work discussion that's going on very intently right now. And this is around the topic of empathy, both from a context of creating inclusive work environments where people can do their best work and bring a diverse perspective to a conversation or a brainstorming session or whatever it is. But also it's as a key component of this sort of design thinking approach, which says build value, you create valuable things when you listen deeply to your customers and you understand, you sort of empathize with their challenges and you find ways to create value for them by resolving challenges that they face. So two contexts, D&I and product development, where empathy seems to be a key. What's the relationship between listening and empathy?
You know, they say in recent times, CEO really stands for Chief Empathy Officer. And
there you go.
The CEOs that are really looking at empathy as a means of a skill set are the ones that are moving the needle internally with their cultures. I think that listening goes hand in hand with empathy because, much like I said earlier, in order to learn, my belief is you have to listen. And in order to be a successful listener, one of your focuses is to learn. So they are this sort of, they go hand in hand with each other. I believe in order to be empathetic, you've got to be listening to learn what's important to the other person and actually feel at a level of what they're feeling so that you can then be a thought partner with them. And one thing I just like to state that I hear a lot from people is they'll say, okay, well, great. If you've got these 4 ways of people that listen, connective, I can see they're really empathetic. Reflective, seems like it's all about them. Analytical, there's no empathy there. And conceptual, ideating and brainstorming, it can feel empathetic if it's really the way the person who's speaking wants to go. It can feel empathetic. And what I want to say about that is it does not matter what kind of a listener you are. You can be very empathetic with facts and figures. You can be very empathetic about what is important to you as long as it is aligned with a bigger you, which is what that dominant reflective person does. And so getting back to your original question, the way listening aligns with empathy is listening is a way that we get out of our own heads and get into the importance of information sharing from the standpoint of others. And once you move from yourself to others, you're typically in a place where you're making a bigger difference. And that empathetic piece is in some aspects where it starts, and in other aspects, just how you get there more quickly.
Has the new world of work post-COVID, digitally mediated, socially distanced, made the work of listening harder?
Yeah, it's definitely made it harder because listening is a brain-based function. We're constantly taxing our brain. You know, there's no such thing as multitasking. So what we're constantly doing is switch tasking. We're jumping from one thing to the next, back and forth in our brain. The more we do that, the more exhaustive it is. if we can, especially in the world of Zoom or whatever product that you use, whatever platform that you're living inside of, if we can have big spaces between our meetings and give ourselves a break, that's one way that we can really be more efficient. But listening has become a much more important sense, if you will, because believe it or not, we need or we do our best listening when we can see people, and the more senses we put into a conversation, the better we listen. So when we start to pull those away, even in, the idea of video meetings, when we are in those, because we don't have that same tactile, we're not right in front of someone, we're trying to read all these other pieces as we're listening to them, and it makes listening harder and exhaustive. And it's what we have to count on now. Quite often in a lot of our meetings, what I suggest to companies is if you have an ongoing meeting, just ask people to be self-monitoring and try to multitask as little as possible, cut your meetings shorter, and turn off the video. And people say, what? Turn off the video? Yeah, give your brain a break, unless it's a high stakes meeting when you turn on the video and you really stay connected. But just by giving that sense a break, if you know people very well and you are out to do not menial tasks, but something that's not extremely high stakes, just use the audio piece and then turn on the visual and really ramp it up when you need to and give yourself some big breaks in between.
I also read a piece today from Microsoft, who have been using this extraordinary time to really measure and analyze changes in work behavior that they can now do because everybody's sort of digitally connected. And it turns out that sort of instinctively, people are moving to shorter meetings. This notion of kind of 1 hour blocks of meetings is people are sort of moving away from that, and they're having shorter 30-minute or less meetings. There's one of the patterns, changed patterns of behavior that they've noticed, which I think is really interesting. According to your survey instrument, I'm a chronically unbalanced listener and over-indexed to the hilt on conceptual listening. 24, 19, and 19, 38 are my numbers. What should I watch out for, and how could I be a more balanced listener, Dana?
Well, just so the audience knows what those numbers, 24, 19, 19, 38 mean, when you take the listening assessment and you receive your profile, because there are 4 habits and 10 questions, the numbers add up to 100. And we're never looking for a certain type of profile where the numbers should be more even or less even.
But what you mean it's not a competition to get a perfect score?
What we think
yes
doesn't mean you're good or bad. Oh my gosh, you're such a bad listener, Chris. Just by this score, I'm really worried. Oh my gosh, not at all. What we do notice, though, is that it gives us the lens into where your listening is focused. And because 24, 19, 19, 38, the 38 is that ideation, that conceptual type listener. It's very high. And you do a great deal of listening for opportunity and possibility and future ideas. What's really interesting, however, is the 24 is your next highest number, which means when you brainstorm and ideate, you do it with others in mind. So you love to brainstorm about what will really support other people. And the other factor that I would say that I notice in these numbers is 19 is not low. The lowest number you can get is 10. The highest number you can get is 40. So the 38 is very high. It's definitely directly influenced by your other 3. So what I was saying to you the other day is you love to brainstorm, but you do it in a very structured way of thinking through how information will land on others, you also have this capacity to bring in your past experiences with your reflective listening, and you stay inside of budgets, timelines, and other things because your analytical is at 19. So you don't have one that's totally not in the picture. And when brainstorming is your highest, it's nice to have those other influences, as opposed to if your brainstorming was 38 or 40 and the other one or two were high and then there was one totally missing, like analytics. So you don't really care about budgets and timelines. You just hand it off to others and say, this is what we're doing. This is where I'm going. Figure out how to get there. So you don't have any of that.
And so in your workshops, how you might use this with a team or with an individual in a coaching context is, are you then saying, like, here are things that you can do to sort of load balance your approach? Are you suggesting questions that you could ask that might drive you in to rebalance here?
If you were an individual contributor or someone who was developing themselves in the collaborative idea, we would look at what your job set was, and in many instances do nothing, share with you, here is your superpower. You have the ability to brainstorm with the best of them. You love that area and it gives you a lot of meaning and sense. Therefore, we don't want to shift that. But if you were, for instance, this was your profile and you were a financial advisor, we would start to say to you, well, when you're with your clients and you're really giving them advice, how are they with your ideas and how much you generate ideas? And have you found that to ever get yourself into trouble? Or do you find that your customers love that because it's something new and exciting? And depending on your answer, we might suggest a part of our workshop is to build questions for yourself. We might suggest that you have one or two go-to questions that keeps you in that area of staying directly connected to their finances, which would be the analytical piece. So it really depends.
Last question from me. Purpose. Why did you choose to do this line of work?
Yeah, I would say just early on in developing my sales acumen and then working with sales teams, there would always be an outlier that people, in my opinion, they had a negative belief about that person. And quite often it was in the way they communicated. And it just bothered me because I could see that that person had something to contribute. And so early on, that was what the motivation was. Through time, it started to shift, staying inside of supporting people who I knew had a lot of good in them and helping them learn to communicate and collaborate in ways that others could see that their capability. It started to shift in the last few years because what I would see is a similar thing from there would happen with teams, where teams would, in their dynamics, would get into ruts where they'd get, they would have their innovation would be slowed down, or they would miss budgets by big long shots. And what was happening is group thinking was happening. And yet some of the individuals were outliers in their ability to listen a certain way, which meant they were thinking a certain way, but they were almost thought of as naysayers. And so what started to happen a few years ago is I wanted to continue to look at this idea of cognitive diversity and the idea that the people who had the most diverse cognitive way of looking at the lens they were looking through were the most iterative teams of all. And so what was getting in their way was defending in their own position or hiding and hoarding information so that they could have their positions be the one that won, WON, that won, the driving of the team. And as soon as we started to break that down and show them that what they were listening to and for was showing us exactly what they were thinking about, and that diversity made the team strengthen because they were smarter together, that became my new focus. And I've been living there for a few years now, helping companies dive in and develop this diversity in their listening, which is diversity in their thinking, and showing them how to quickly see it, hire for it, build teams with it, and utilize it rather than have it be something that was, pulling people apart. It was bringing them together.
Thanks for sharing what you know about listening with us today, Dan. It was really a fun conversation.
Well, I really appreciate it, Chris, and I love what you're doing. And I love that listening is a part of learning, because